I arrived at the family luncheon. My mocking son-in-law shouted at the top of his lungs, "Attention, everyone! The smelly cleaning lady is present." Everyone looked at me, laughing. My face turned red, and my heart raced. As I turned to leave, my daughter grabbed my arm and whispered something in my ear, and that changed everything. But let me tell you how I got to that horrible moment. That morning, I had woken up at 5, just like always. My knees creaked as I placed my feet on the cold floor of my small bedroom. I had slept poorly, nervous about the lunch at my daughter Sarah's house. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to show them that I was still useful, that I wasn't a burden, that I could contribute something beautiful to this family gathering. I went to the kitchen and started preparing the carrot cake that Sarah had loved since she was a little girl. I used my last $40 to buy the freshest ingredients from the market: whole milk, heavy cream, fresh carrots, large eggs, pure vanilla extract, and pecans. No cheap products. I wanted it to taste like love, like memories, like all those afternoons when Sarah and I were just the two of us against the world. I beat the eggs with care, sifted the flour 3 times to ensure it was exact, and baked the sponge cake, checking it every 5 minutes. When it was ready, I frosted it with a thick layer of cream cheese icing and let it set while I got ready. I took a shower with warm water and put on my best floral dress, the one I had ironed the night before, until not a single wrinkle remained. I brushed my white hair and pulled it back into a simple but elegant bun. I looked in the mirror and saw a tired 70-year-old woman, with deep wrinkles around her eyes and mouth, with spots on her hands that betrayed decades of hard labor. But I also saw dignity. I saw a woman who had fought all her life and was still standing. I took the cake carefully, wrapped it in aluminum foil, and left my house. The journey to Sarah's house was long. I had to take 2 city buses and walk 3 blocks under the scorching sun. My feet ached inside my old shoes, but I kept going. I arrived at that big house, that pretty house, with a manicured lawn and a 2-car garage. That house I had helped secure when I lent them the $20,000 I had saved from my entire life of work. They never paid me back, but it didn't matter. It was for my daughter, for her happiness. I knocked on the door with my knuckles, trying to calm the nerves that were churning in my stomach. I heard voices inside, laughter, soft jazz music. It sounded like a party, like joy, like a united family. The door swung open, and there was Richard, my son-in-law, the man who had married my Sarah 10 years ago. From the first day, I knew there was something off about him, something in his cold eyes, in his calculated smile, in the way he looked at me as if I were trash on the street. But Sarah loved him, or so she said, so I swallowed my doubts and tried to accept him. That day he was wearing an impeccable white dress shirt, expensive slacks, and shiny loafers. He looked like a successful man, important, someone who had made it big in life. He looked me up and down with contempt. I saw his nose wrinkle, his lips twist into a grimace of disgust, and then he did it. He opened his mouth and shouted with all the strength in his lungs, "Attention, everyone! The smelly cleaning lady is present." His voice boomed through the house like thunder. I froze in the entryway, clutching my cake, feeling the ground open up beneath my feet. Time stopped. I heard the thick silence that followed his words. And then, the laughter. Laughter coming from the dining room, laughter piercing me like needles. I peeked in timidly and saw all the guests looking at me. There were about 20 people there. Richard's relatives, some of Sarah's cousins, neighbors, friends, all with their glasses of wine in hand, all well-dressed, all belonging to that world I clearly wasn't part of. Some looked away, ashamed. Others smiled uncomfortably, not knowing what to do. But several laughed openly, finding Richard's cruel comment funny. My face burned. I felt a scorching heat rise up my neck, set my cheeks on fire, and reach my forehead. My heart started beating so fast and so hard, I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the cake. I looked at Richard, and he was still standing there in the doorway, blocking my path, with that diabolical smile drawn on his perfect face. He was enjoying this. He was savoring every second of my public humiliation. "What's the matter, mother-in-law?" he said to me in a sugary fake voice. "Coming straight from work without showering? You should have more consideration for the guests." He pointed his finger at me as if I were a dirty dog that had just dragged in mud. More laughter, more stares, more shame. I smelled fine. I had bathed. I had put on lotion. I had sprayed on that drugstore rose perfume I buy at the discount mart. I didn't smell bad, but in that moment, with all those people looking at me with contempt or pity, I started to doubt. I started to feel that maybe I did smell bad, that maybe I was dirty, that maybe I was everything Richard said I was. I felt like vomiting. I felt like running. I felt like disappearing from the face of the earth and never coming back. Tears began to well up in my eyes, hot and heavy, ready to overflow. But I bit my lip hard, so hard I tasted the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I wasn't going to let them see me break. I had spent 70 years in this world full of blows and betrayals. I had lost my husband. I had raised my daughter alone. I had worked in other people's houses, scrubbing floors and toilets to put food on the table. I had survived worse things than the poisonous words of a small, cruel man. But this hurt differently. This wasn't a rude boss or an ungrateful client. This was my own daughter's family. This was the house I had helped buy, in front of people who were supposed to know me and respect me. This was betrayal in its purest and most painful form. I took a step back, moving away from Richard, away from that laughter, away from that place where I clearly wasn't welcome. My legs barely held me up. My whole body was trembling. I was going to turn around. I was going to leave there with the little dignity I had left. I was going to go back to my humble little house and lock myself away forever. But then I felt it. A hand grabbed my arm firmly. I spun around, startled, and saw my daughter Sarah. Her eyes were shining, but not with mockery. There was something else there, something I couldn't decipher in that moment. She pulled me gently toward her and brought her mouth close to my ear. Her warm breath brushed my skin as she whispered words I didn't expect to hear. "Tomorrow, everything changes, Mom. Trust me. Just hold on a little longer." Her voice trembled with contained emotion. She squeezed my arm tighter, as if transmitting her energy, her determination to me. And that changed everything. I didn't understand what Sarah meant by those words, but something in her tone made me stay. Something in the way she squeezed my arm told me there was more than I could see right then. I swallowed my tears, lifted my chin, and walked into that house with the cake still shaking in my hands. Richard stepped aside with a mocking smirk, as if my decision to stay was another source of amusement for him. Sarah guided me to the kitchen, away from the guests' gazes. I left the cake on the table carefully and leaned against the counter because my legs weren't supporting me well anymore. My daughter looked me in the eyes, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Determination, strength, contained rage. "Mom, I know what you just went through was horrible. I know you want to leave, but I'm asking you to stay today. Just today. Tomorrow everything is going to be different. I promise you." She didn't give me more explanations. She just poured me a glass of cold water and asked me to breathe deeply. Then she left the kitchen, leaving me alone with my scrambled thoughts and my still racing heart. I stood there, looking at that cake I had made with so much love, wondering if things had ever been different in my life. I closed my eyes, and the memories came like an avalanche. I remembered when I was 45 years old, and my world collapsed in an instant. My husband James died of a massive heart attack while working construction. One day he was there, strong and healthy, making plans for the future. The next day, he was gone. He left me alone with a 15-year-old girl, a house half paid off, and debts I didn't know how to face. The life insurance we thought we had turned out to be insufficient. It barely covered the funeral and a few months of basic expenses. After that, I was left completely alone facing the storm. Sarah cried every night for her dad. I wanted to cry too. I wanted to stay in bed and surrender to the weight of the tragedy, but I couldn't. I had a daughter who depended on me. I had to be strong, even though I was dying inside. So, a month after becoming a widow, I went out to look for work. I didn't have a college education. I had barely finished high school before getting married. I didn't know how to do anything specialized, but I knew how to clean. I knew how to cook. I knew how to iron. I knew how to take care of a home because I had taken care of mine for 20 years. I got my first job as a housekeeper in the home of a wealthy family on the north side of the city. They paid me $200 a week to work 6 full days. From 7 in the morning until 6 in the evening. I cleaned 4 bathrooms, 6 bedrooms, a huge kitchen, washed mountains of laundry, ironed expensive shirts, and dresses that cost more than my monthly salary. My hands cracked from the cleaning chemicals. My knees started to hurt from kneeling so much to scrub floors. My back became a permanent knot of pain. But I endured. I endured because Sarah needed to eat, needed clothes for school, needed books, needed a future better than mine. I worked in that house for 5 years. Then I got another job in an office building, cleaning at night when everyone left. They paid me a little more, $300 a week, but I had to work from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. I arrived home just as Sarah was waking up to go to school. I made her breakfast with my eyes closed from sleepiness, made sure she had everything she needed, and then I went to sleep for 4 or 5 hours before getting up to do the housework. On weekends, I worked cleaning private homes on my own, $50 per house, sometimes $70 if it was very big or very dirty. I never had a day off for 15 years. I never took a vacation. I never gave myself the luxury of resting or doing something just for me. Every penny I earned went to Sarah or the house. I managed to finish paying off the mortgage when I was 55. That day I cried with joy. We finally had a roof of our own that no one could take away from us. Finally, there was some security in our lives. Sarah had already finished college by then. She studied business administration with a partial scholarship she got for her good grades. I paid the rest with my savings. It was $20,000 over 4 years. Money that came from my cracked hands, my shattered knees, my sleepless nights. When Sarah graduated, it was the happiest day of my life. I watched her walk up to the stage in her cap and gown, receive her diploma, smile with that smile that lit up everything. I thought all the sacrifice had been worth it. I thought finally she would have the life I could never have. She got a good job at an accounting firm. She started earning well, much better than I had in my entire life. She bought nice clothes, brand-name shoes, got her hair done in expensive salons. She looked successful, confident, happy, and I was proud. So proud that my chest burst every time I saw her. But then she met Richard. She was 28 when she brought him home for the first time. He was handsome, polite on the surface, well-dressed. He worked as a manager at a bank. He said the right words, made the right gestures. But something in his eyes made me uncomfortable from the start. There was a coldness there, a calculation. The way he looked at our house, evaluating, judging, the way he looked at me, with that mixture of pity and barely disguised contempt. Sarah was in love. She talked about him all the time, about how wonderful he was, about how well he treated her, about the plans they had together. They got married a year after meeting. I paid for half the wedding, $10,000 that I took from my life savings. I wanted Sarah to have the wedding she had always dreamed of. Elegant white dress, nice venue, abundant food, flowers everywhere. She looked like a princess that day. Richard looked like the prince. But when it was my turn to dance with my daughter, she whispered in my ear, "Thanks for everything, Mom. Now you'll be able to rest. Richard and I are going to take care of you." It made me cry. I thought I could finally let my guard down, that finally someone else would carry the weight with me. A year into their marriage, they came to visit me with a proposal. They wanted to buy a bigger house, a house in a better neighborhood. They needed money for the down payment. They asked to borrow the $20,000 I had left in the bank. Everything I had saved in 40 years of work was in that account. It was my security, my backup in case something bad happened, my fund for old age. But when I saw Sarah's pleading eyes, when I heard Richard promise me they would pay me back in 2 years with interest, I couldn't refuse. I gave them everything. I signed the papers at the bank, transferred the full amount, and was left with an almost empty account. 2 years passed, and they paid me back nothing. 5 years passed, and they still didn't mention the debt. I didn't want to pressure them. I didn't want to be that annoying mother-in-law who demands money. I thought when they could, they would pay me. Meanwhile, I kept working even though my bones creaked with every movement. At 65, I had to leave the night job at the offices because my body couldn't take it anymore. I was left only with cleaning private homes. I earned barely $800 a month. It was barely enough to pay for utilities, food, and medicine. My blood pressure was high. My knees needed injections every 6 months. My hands shook from arthritis. Sarah came to visit me less and less. At first, it was once a week, then once a month, then every 2 or 3 months. Always in a hurry, always with excuses. Richard never came with her. He said he had a lot of work, that he was busy, that he couldn't waste time. I understood, or so I told myself. But deep down, it hurt. It hurt to see how my daughter was drifting away little by little, how that big, pretty house I had helped buy became a place where I was no longer welcome. The few times I went to visit, Richard treated me with a cold and distant courtesy, as if I were a stranger, as if the $20,000 debt they never paid didn't exist. I opened my eyes and returned to the present. I was still in that kitchen, with my cake on the table, and the echo of humiliation still ringing in my ears. But Sarah's words also resonated. Tomorrow, everything changes. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what my daughter was planning. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a small spark of hope light up in my tired chest. I took a deep breath and left the kitchen with my legs still trembling. The dining room was full of elegant people, all with their glasses of wine and their plates of expensive food that I could never afford. I sat in a chair at the end of the table, as far as possible from Richard. No one spoke to me. No one looked at me. It was as if I were invisible, as if I didn't exist in that space full of laughter and animated conversations. Sarah brought me a plate of food and squeezed my shoulder affectionately before walking away. I ate in silence. Every bite tasted like ash in my mouth. I could feel Richard's gaze on me from time to time, that mocking look that burned my skin. As I ate, I remembered the first time I suspected something was wrong with Richard. It was 3 years ago, when I turned 67. Sarah organized a small birthday dinner at her house. It was just the two of them and me. Richard was acting strange all night, too nice, too interested in my life. He asked me odd questions. "Mother-in-law, do you have a will made?" It took me by surprise. I told him no, that I had never thought about that. "You should do it," he insisted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "At your age, one never knows what can happen. It would be good to leave everything in order, so Sarah doesn't have problems later." Then he asked about my house. "The house is completely paid off, right? It's in your name." I confirmed that yes, I had finished paying for it years ago, and the title was in my name. I saw how his eyes shone with something I couldn't identify at that moment. "That's good, mother-in-law. That's an important asset. It's worth about $500,000 in the current market, don't you think?" I didn't understand why he cared so much about the value of my house. It was my home, my only asset in this world, the only place where I had roots and memories of when James was alive and Sarah was a little girl. After that, he asked about my pension. "How much do you get a month from Social Security?" I told him $1,400. Not much, but with that and the cleaning jobs I still did, it was enough to live modestly. $1,400, Richard repeated slowly, as if calculating something in his head. "That adds up to $16,800 a year. Not bad for someone who doesn't work full-time anymore." His comment annoyed me. I still worked cleaning 3 houses a week. I still broke my back scrubbing floors and cleaning other people's bathrooms. I wasn't a burden to anyone. I supported myself with my own resources. Sarah gave him a discreet nudge and changed the subject, but I didn't forget that conversation. From that day on, Richard started visiting me more often, always with excuses. I was passing by and wanted to say hello. "I brought some documents Sarah needs you to sign. I came to check on some leaks you said you had." But I didn't have leaks. I had never asked him to come, and those documents he brought were always confusing, full of legal words I didn't understand. "It's just a temporary power of attorney, mother-in-law, so Sarah can help you with bank transactions if you get sick." I never signed anything. Something inside me told me not to do it. A year ago, Richard suggested I sell my house and move in with them. "You'd live more comfortably, mother-in-law. You'd have a nice room. You wouldn't have to worry about paying utilities or maintenance. And with the money from the sale, we could invest it to generate interest for you." He said it all so reasonably, so logically. But I didn't want to sell my house. It was the only thing I had left of my life with James. Every corner had a memory. The garden where Sarah played as a child. The living room where we celebrated 1,000 Christmases. The bedroom where James and I slept for 20 years. It wasn't just a property. It was my history, my identity, my place in the world. I told him no, and I saw how his face hardened for a second before returning to the fake smile. Think about it, mother-in-law. The offer still stands. But after that, his treatment of me changed. He became colder, sharper. The comments started. You look so tired, mother-in-law. Work is killing you. At your age, you should be resting, not cleaning other people's houses. Sarah worries a lot about you. She's afraid something will happen to you and no one will find out because you live alone. Every comment was a seed of doubt planted in my head. Every word was an attempt to make me feel old, incapable, vulnerable. 6 months ago, I started noticing strange things. When I visited Sarah's house, I found papers with my bank's logo on the table. I heard phone conversations that cut off abruptly when I entered the room. Once I saw Richard reviewing documents I recognized as copies of my house deeds. I asked him how he had gotten them. Sarah needed them for some paperwork, he told me, without flinching. I'm already returning them. But something didn't add up. What paperwork required the deeds to my property? Sarah assured me it was something for the bank. Not to worry, that everything was fine. One day, 4 months ago, I went to the bank to withdraw my pension, and the teller told me something that froze my blood. Mrs. Eleanor, your daughter was here last week asking about the procedures to add a co-owner to your account. I explained that she would need your authorization and presence to make any changes. I was left speechless. Why would Sarah want to be a co-owner of my account? Why hadn't she told me anything? When I confronted her that night over the phone, she got nervous. It's just a precaution, Mom, in case something happens to you and I need to access your funds for medical emergencies. It sounded logical, but I barely had $3,000 in that account. It wasn't anything extraordinary. Then I started connecting the dots. Richard's questions about my house, his attempts to get me to sign powers of attorney, the suggestion to sell my property, Sarah wanting access to my bank account, the copies of my deeds on his table. Everything was starting to form a pattern that frightened me. I talked to my neighbor Betty, a 75-year-old woman who had been my friend for decades. I told her my suspicions. She got serious. Eleanor, be very careful. My cousin went through something similar. The son-in-law convinced her to sign some papers that turned out to be a transfer of property. They left her with nothing and sent her to a state nursing home. Her words terrified me. Was it possible that Richard was planning something like that? And Sarah? Would my own daughter be involved in a plan to take everything from me? I didn't want to believe it. I refused to accept that the girl I raised, to whom I gave everything I had and didn't have, could betray me in that way. But the signs were there, clear as water. I tried to talk to Sarah in private 2 months ago. Daughter, I need you to be honest with me. Is Richard planning something with my house? Why so much interest in my properties and my money? She got offended. Mom, how can you think that? Richard only wants to help you. He just wants you to be well taken care of in your old age. But she didn't convince me. Her voice sounded rehearsed, as if she were repeating words someone else had taught her. I decided to be more careful. I kept all my important documents in a safe I bought for $100. I put a padlock on my bedroom door when I left the house. I stopped accepting invitations to Sarah's house. I distanced myself a little. I needed to think. I needed to protect myself. But that only made things worse. Richard started calling me on the phone more frequently. Mother-in-law, Sarah is very sad because you don't visit anymore. Did we do something wrong? She's upset with us. His tone was sweet, but there was venom underneath. A month ago, I received a call from a lawyer. He said Sarah had hired him to help me organize my legal affairs at no cost to me. He offered me a free appointment to make my will and arrange the succession of my property. It's important that everything is clear, Mrs. Eleanor. That way your daughter won't have problems when you're gone. I told him I would think about it and hung up. I never called back. That night I couldn't sleep. The pieces of the puzzle fit together in a horrible way. Richard didn't want to help me. Richard wanted my house. He wanted my pension. He wanted everything I had, and he was using Sarah to get it. I returned to the present and looked at Richard on the other side of the table. He was laughing with some guests, telling some anecdote with his typical arrogance. He looked so sure of himself, so confident, as if he had already won, as if I were just a minor obstacle on his path to what he wanted. I felt rage, a hot, dark rage that rose from my stomach to my throat. But Sarah's words resonated in my head. Tomorrow, everything changes. Maybe my daughter wasn't part of the problem. Maybe she had seen the same thing I did. Maybe there was a plan I didn't know yet. I clung to that hope like a castaway clings to a piece of wood in the middle of the ocean. The lunch continued with painful slowness. I remained sitting in my corner, invisible to everyone except Richard, who occasionally shot me glances loaded with contempt. The guests talked about things that didn't matter to me. Expensive trips to Europe, new cars, exclusive restaurants, a world completely foreign to mine, where I cleaned the floors they walked on without even looking down. When they finished the main course, Sarah brought my carrot cake to the table. I had decorated it with chopped nuts and cream cheese piping. It looked beautiful, a tribute of love from a mother to her daughter. But before she could serve the first slice, Richard spoke with that loud voice he used when he wanted to be the center of attention. "Oh, mother-in-law, you shouldn't have bothered. With how expensive milk and nuts are now, surely you spent everything you had on this dessert." He laughed as if he had said something funny. Some guests laughed with him. I clenched my fists under the table. It wasn't the comment itself that hurt. It was the intention behind it. It was the constant reminder that I was poor, that everything I did was an economic effort, that my place in this world of wealthy people was that of the servant, not the family. Sarah cut the cake with trembling hands and served generous slices to everyone. When they tried the first bite, several guests made kind comments. "It's delicious, so moist and rich. You can tell it was made with love." Those comments warmed my heart for a second, but Richard didn't try his slice. He moved it around with his fork, made a face of displeasure, and pushed it to the side of the plate. Too sweet for my taste. Besides, I don't like eating things made in kitchens I don't know. You never know under what conditions they're prepared. Silence fell over the table like a heavy stone. Some guests stopped eating, uncomfortable. Others continued as if they hadn't heard anything. I felt something break inside me. I had endured his insults, his humiliations, his constant contempt. But attacking the food I had prepared with so much love, insinuating that my kitchen was dirty, that I was careless, that was too much. I stood up from the chair with trembling legs. Everyone looked at me. I was going to say something. I was going to defend myself for the first time in my life. But Sarah took my hand and led me toward the kitchen again. "Mom, please, just a little longer. I beg you." Her voice was charged with urgency. There were tears in her eyes. I nodded because I didn't have the strength to fight with her too. I stayed in the kitchen for the rest of the lunch. I listened to the distant conversations, the laughter, the toasts. I felt like a ghost in the house I had helped buy. After a while, Sarah entered with a beautiful young woman of about 22. She had long black hair and her father's light brown eyes. It was Chloe, my granddaughter, whom I had barely seen in the last 2 years. "Grandma," she said to me softly as she hugged me tight, "I'm so sorry for what that bastard did to you. But soon he's going to pay for everything." Her comment surprised me. I looked at Sarah seeking explanations. My daughter closed the kitchen door and sat in front of me. Chloe sat beside me and took my wrinkled hand between her young, soft ones. "Mom," Sarah began with a serious voice, "I have to tell you something I've been keeping for weeks. But first I need you to promise me you're going to stay calm and that you'll trust me." I nodded, although my heart started beating faster. 3 months ago, I discovered something terrible. Richard isn't the man I thought he was. He never was. Her voice broke a little. I found documents hidden in his home office. Papers with your name, with your home address, with your bank account numbers. I froze. "What kind of documents?" I asked with a thread of a voice. Sarah took out her phone and showed me photographs. They were copies of contracts, powers of attorney already drafted waiting only for my signature, loan applications using my house as collateral. "He's planning to take everything from you. Mom, your house, your pension, your savings, everything." The words hit me like hammer blows. I found conversations on his computer with a corrupt lawyer. They were discussing ways to have you declared mentally incompetent so that I could take control of your assets as your only heir. And then Richard would take control of everything through me. Chloe squeezed my hand. I discovered it before Mom, Grandma. I heard Dad talking on the phone about 4 months ago. He was saying horrible things about you, that you were a burden, that you had a house worth money and a decent pension that was being wasted, that things had to be sped up because he didn't know how much longer you would live. Tears rolled down my cheeks. My own granddaughter had heard those poisonous words. I told Mom what I had heard. At first, she didn't believe me. She defended Dad, but I asked her to investigate on her own. And when she found those documents, she knew I was telling the truth. Sarah continued with a trembling voice. I wanted to confront him immediately. Mom, I wanted to kick him out of the house and report him. But Chloe convinced me to wait, to gather proof first, because if I accused him without solid evidence, he was going to deny everything and maybe even manage to turn the situation in his favor. My daughter wiped her tears with the back of her hand. So for these 3 months, we've been gathering everything, every conversation, every document, every suspicious movement. Chloe has recorded conversations using her phone hidden. I've photographed every paper I find. We've spoken to an honest lawyer who is helping us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My daughter hadn't betrayed me. My daughter was protecting me. But why didn't you tell me anything before? I asked between sobs. Because Richard watches you. Mom, every time you go to your house, he sends someone to follow you. He has friends at the bank who inform him if you make strange movements with your account. He has contacts in government offices who would warn him if you tried to change anything legally. We couldn't risk him suspecting we were against him. He had to keep believing everything was going according to his plan. Chloe took a small recorder out of her pocket. Grandma, I have over 20 hours of audio recorded. Conversations where Dad talks to his accomplices about how to manipulate documents, how to convince you to sign papers, how to eventually commit you to a cheap state nursing home to keep your house and rent it out. It's disgusting. It's criminal. And we're going to expose him. My granddaughter had fire in her eyes, a determination that reminded me of myself when I was young and fighting to survive with little Sarah. The plan is simple. Tomorrow there is a big family reunion. It's Richard's brother's birthday. His parents, his brothers, his uncles, everyone who has always treated him as if he were perfect, will be there. Sarah took control of the explanation. During that reunion, we're going to expose everything. We're going to play the audios so everyone hears exactly what kind of man Richard is. We're going to show the documents he planned to use to rob you. And we have a lawyer present who is going to explain the legal implications of all this. Richard isn't just going to be socially exposed. He's going to face criminal charges for attempted estate fraud and financial abuse of an elderly person. The rage in my daughter's voice was palpable. He used you, Mom. He used your love, your generosity, your trust, and he used me too. He manipulated me for years, making me believe we were helping you, when in reality, he was hunting you like a predator. I felt dizzy with all this information. It was too much to process. And what's going to happen to you two? To your marriage? I asked Sarah. She took a deep breath. My marriage ended the day I discovered what he was planning against you. There is no going back. I already spoke to a divorce lawyer. This house he thinks is his is in my name because it was bought with my money and yours, Mom. The $20,000 you lent us was the down payment. I've paid the mortgage these 10 years with my salary. Richard has only contributed to expenses, never to the property. Legally, this house is mine, and he's going to leave with nothing. Chloe smiled with satisfaction. Plus, Grandma, Mom has been moving money to accounts Dad doesn't know about. She took her savings out of the joint bank account, changed the passwords to everything, contacted her boss to explain the situation in case Dad tries to sabotage her job. We've covered every angle. He thinks he has all the control, but actually, he already lost. The admiration I felt for my daughter and granddaughter in that moment had no words. These two women had risked everything to protect me. They had meticulously planned the downfall of a dangerous and manipulative man. But today, he had to humiliate you one more time, Sarah said with pain in her eyes. We needed him to feel safe, invincible. We needed him to show his true face in front of witnesses. I understood then why Sarah had asked me to stay, despite the humiliation. Several of today's guests are people who are going to be at the birthday tomorrow, Chloe explained. They saw how he treated you. They heard his insults. That's going to ensure that tomorrow, when we show the evidence, no one can say we're exaggerating or making things up. They already saw what he's capable of publicly. They'll easily imagine what he's capable of in private. It was a brilliant and painful plan at the same time. I had had to suffer so they could build the perfect case against Richard. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Sarah said, hugging me tight. "I'm sorry for taking so long to see who he really was. I'm sorry for exposing you to his mistreatment. I'm sorry for not protecting you sooner." I stroked her hair like when she was a little girl. "You don't have to apologize, daughter. The important thing is that now you're on the right side, that you're fighting for what is fair." We stayed like that, hugging, crying together. 3 generations of women who had been underestimated and mistreated, but were now ready to fight. "Tomorrow," Sarah whispered, "tomorrow that man is going to fall. And you are going to recover your dignity, Mom. I promise you." I left that house with a different weight in my chest. It was no longer the weight of humiliation and defeat. It was the weight of a powerful secret, of a truth that would soon explode like a bomb. Richard saw me off at the door with his fake and condescending smile. "Take care, mother-in-law, and thanks for the cake, although it wasn't necessary for you to bother." Every word dripped venom disguised as politeness. I just nodded and left without saying anything. I didn't trust my voice. I didn't trust being able to keep the secret if I opened my mouth. On the bus back home, I looked out the window and remembered all the signs I had ignored for years. I remembered when Richard started treating me differently. It was subtle at first, small comments here and there. "Mother-in-law, you look tired. You should go to the doctor. What a bad memory you have lately, mother-in-law. You already told me that story 3 times. I thought it was genuine concern. Now I understood he was planting the idea that I was declining mentally, that I was losing my faculties. He did it in front of other relatives, in front of neighbors, in front of anyone who could serve as a future witness to my supposed incompetence. It was a calculated and cruel strategy. I remembered the time I fell in his house a year ago. I slipped on the kitchen floor that had just been mopped. I hit my hip and got a huge bruise. Richard insisted on taking me to the hospital. I thought he was kind, but now I realized he needed a medical report of my fall, evidence he could use to argue that I was prone to accidents, that I couldn't live alone safely. At the hospital, he filled out forms as if he were my legal guardian. He gave the doctor exaggerated information about supposed episodes of confusion I had never had. I was so sore and bruised I didn't pay attention to what he was saying. I remembered when he gave me a new cell phone 6 months ago. "So we can stay in touch, mother-in-law. This one has better reception and is easier to use." I was grateful for the gift. My old phone barely worked, but now I wondered if that phone had something installed to track me or listen to my conversations. Sarah had told me Richard watched me. How did he do it if not that way? I felt a chill thinking about all the private calls I had made from that phone, all the conversations with Betty where I expressed my doubts about him. I remembered the day Richard showed up at my house with a locksmith. "Mother-in-law, I found this guy who changes locks for a very good price. Let him install new deadbolts so you're safer." I accepted because the old locks indeed didn't work well. But Richard supervised all the work. "I'll keep a set of keys, in case of an emergency, and we need to get in." At that moment it seemed reasonable. Now I realized he had wanted access to my house whenever he wanted, to review my documents, to search for information he could use against me. I arrived at my little house and locked the door. I leaned against the old wood and took a deep breath. I looked around my humble home. The old furniture I had bought secondhand, the curtains faded by the sun, the photographs on the walls of James when he was alive, of Sarah at her graduation, of Chloe as a baby. This place wasn't elegant or modern, but it was mine. Every inch of these walls had been paid for with my sweat and tears, and that man had wanted to take it from me. He had planned to steal not only my property, but my dignity, my freedom, my right to grow old in the place I had built with so much effort. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed thinking about everything Sarah and Chloe had revealed to me. I thought about the audios they had recorded, about the conversations where Richard spoke of me as if I were an object in his path, an obstacle to be removed. I thought about the corrupt lawyer with whom he had conspired, about the forged documents ready for my signature, about the plan to declare me mentally incompetent. It was like a horror movie. Except it was my real life. It was my family. It was the man sleeping next to my daughter every night. I got up at 3 in the morning and made myself some chamomile tea. I sat at the kitchen table where I had sat so many times with James planning our future. "Oh, James," I whispered to nothingness. "If you saw what our life became, if you knew that the man our daughter chose turned out to be a snake." I felt like crying, but no tears came. I had already cried too much in recent years. I had already spent all my tears on lonely nights wondering where I had failed as a mother, why my daughter was drifting away from me, why I felt so alone in my own family. But now, I knew the truth. I hadn't failed as a mother. My daughter loved me. My granddaughter adored me. The problem was never me. The problem was Richard and his sick ambition, his boundless greed, his capacity to manipulate and lie without remorse. Men like him exist in the world. They approach vulnerable families, identify their weaknesses, exploit their resources. I was the widow with a paid-off house and a modest pension. I was the perfect target. And he had spent years sharpening his knives for the moment of the final attack. But what Richard didn't know is that the women he had underestimated were stronger and smarter than he ever imagined. The next day dawned gray and cold. I dressed with care, choosing my best outfit, a simple but elegant dress I had bought at a thrift store. I applied light makeup. I put on some faux pearl earrings that James had given me 30 years ago. I looked in the mirror and saw a 70-year-old woman who had survived devastating losses, years of grueling work, the loneliness of widowhood, the contempt of a cruel son-in-law. But I also saw a survivor. I saw a warrior who was about to witness the fall of her enemy. Today, I told myself in front of the mirror, today justice begins. Sarah picked me up at 3 in the afternoon. She came alone in her car. "Where is Richard?" I asked. "He went straight from his office. The party is at his parents' house. We'll arrive together." During the drive, Sarah reviewed the plan with me. "There are going to be about 40 people, Mom. All of Richard's family. Some of our cousins, too. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, is going to be there disguised as a family friend. Chloe has the recordings ready on her phone, connected to portable speakers. I have printed copies of all the documents I found. When the moment comes for the toast for Richard's brother's birthday, I'm going to ask to speak. And that's when everything will be blown wide open." My heart was beating fast, but not from fear. It was anticipation. It was the feeling that finally, after years of being invisible and mistreated, I was going to be seen. I was going to be heard. And the man who had tried to destroy me was going to pay for every insult, every humiliation, every evil plan he had woven in the dark. "Are you ready, Mom?" Sarah asked me as she parked in front of a huge house with lights and balloons. "More than ready, daughter," I replied with a firm voice I didn't recognize as mine. "I'm ready to see that wretch fall." We entered the house, and the noise of the party enveloped us. There was music, laughter, kids running everywhere. Richard's parents' house was immense, decorated with expensive furniture and pretentious artwork. Everything screamed money, success, superiority. I saw Richard at the back of the room, surrounded by men in elegant suits, telling some story with exaggerated gestures. When he saw me enter, his smile froze for a second. Then he recovered his composure and greeted me from afar with a condescending wave of his hand. He didn't come closer. He made no effort to welcome me. I was just the poor mother-in-law, the uncomfortable presence that had to be tolerated. Richard's mother, a tall, thin woman with evident plastic surgery, approached to greet us. "Sarah, darling, so good you came." Then she looked at me with a forced smile. "Mrs. Eleanor." She didn't even use my last name, just a cold and distant title. "There's food in the dining room. Help yourselves to whatever you like." She dismissed us with a wave of her hand, like someone dismissing the help. Sarah squeezed my arm tightly. "Hang on, Mom. Soon these people are going to see who you really are." We headed to a corner of the room where there were fewer people. Chloe appeared minutes later, dressed in a nice dress, carrying a large tote bag. "Everything is ready," my granddaughter whispered as she sat next to us. "Mr. Peterson is already here. He's talking to Dad's uncle, pretending to be a colleague from the bank." I looked discreetly toward where she was pointing and saw a man of about 50, gray hair, formal suit, chatting animatedly with other guests. No one would suspect he was a lawyer waiting for the moment to unmask a criminal. "The speakers are in my bag," Chloe continued. "They're small, but powerful. When the moment comes, I'm going to take them out and connect my phone. I have the first recording queued up." Time passed with torturous slowness. I barely touched the food served to me. My stomach was in knots. I watched Richard move through the party like a peacock, receiving pats on the back, conspiratorial laughter, admiration from his relatives. He was the successful son, the perfect husband, the man who had gone far. No one knew that behind that impeccable facade hid a predator without scruples. But soon they would know. Soon, that whole castle of lies would come crashing down, and I would be there to see it crumble. Richard approached our table around 6 in the evening. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, and that arrogant smile I hated so much. "Mother-in-law, what a joy that you came. I thought after yesterday you'd be tired." His tone was mocking. Several relatives nearby heard the comment and smiled. "Yesterday she had lunch at our house," Richard explained to his cousins. "The poor thing arrived so tired from work she looked like she was dragging herself. At her age, she shouldn't be cleaning other people's houses anymore. It's sad to see her like that." He spoke of me as if I weren't present, as if I were an object of pity and shame. One of his cousins, a heavy-set man with a red tie, looked at me with fake compassion. "It's true, ma'am. At your age you should be resting. My parents are already 70, and they haven't worked for years. They live quietly on their pension." Richard seized the opportunity. "That's what I've told her 1,000 times. But she's stubborn. She doesn't accept help from anyone. She prefers to kill herself working than accept that she can't do it alone anymore." His words were poisoned darts. He was painting me as a proud and difficult old woman, incapable of accepting reality. He was preparing the ground in these people's minds so that when he proposed committing me or taking away my independence, they would feel understanding. I felt Sarah's hand squeeze mine under the table. She was asking me to stay quiet, not to take the bait. I took a deep breath and looked down. Richard took my silence as submission and smiled satisfied. "Well, enjoy the party." He walked away, swaggering, victorious. The cousin with the red tie patted me on the shoulder. "Don't worry, ma'am. Richard is a good man. I'm sure he takes good care of you and your daughter. If only he knew. If only he knew the truth behind that good man." Soon he would. Soon everyone would. At 7 o'clock sharp, they brought out the birthday cake for Richard's brother. It was a huge 3-tier cake decorated with fondant and sugar flowers. Nothing to do with my humble carrot cake from yesterday. They sang "Happy Birthday" with out-of-tune and cheerful voices. The brother, David, blew out the candles while everyone applauded. Then Richard's father, a stern-looking older man, called for silence by tapping his glass with a spoon. "Family, friends, thank you for being here celebrating with us. I want to make a toast to my son David, who turns 45 today. A hard-working, honest man, an example for everyone." Everyone raised their glasses. I didn't have a glass. No one had served me wine or champagne. I was invisible even in the toasts. Richard's father continued talking about David's achievements, about his values, about the pride he felt as a father. When he finished his speech, there was applause. Then Richard asked to speak. "Dad, family, I also want to say something. I want to thank my brother David for always being an example of integrity. And I want to take this opportunity to talk about another important topic." My heart raced. What was he doing? This wasn't in the plan. Richard pointed at me with his glass. "As you know, my mother-in-law Eleanor is here with us. She is 70 years old and still works cleaning houses because she has no other option. Sarah and I have been thinking a lot about how to help her. We've considered having her move in with us, but the house isn't big enough." He paused dramatically. "So we have been exploring other options. There is a very nice place, a home for the elderly, where she could be well taken care of, with medical attention 24 hours a day, recreational activities, a place where she wouldn't have to worry about anything." The silence in the room was thick. Everyone was looking at me, some with pity, others with approval toward Richard for being so considerate. I felt the floor opening under my feet. He was using this party to start planting the idea publicly. He was preparing his family for the day he would take my house and commit me to some cheap asylum. And he was doing it in front of everyone, painting himself as the generous hero taking care of his helpless mother-in-law. Rage boiled in my veins. I looked at Sarah and saw she was pale, fists clenched. But there was something else in her expression. There was determination. The moment had arrived. Sarah stood up from her chair abruptly. The sound of the chair dragging across the floor captured everyone's attention. "Richard," my daughter said with a strong, clear voice, "before you keep talking about plans for my mother, I think there are some things your whole family needs to hear." Richard looked at her confused. "What are you talking about, honey? This can wait." But Sarah shook her head. "No, it can't wait. In fact, it's waited too long. Chloe, please." My granddaughter took the speakers out of her bag and placed them on the table. She connected her phone with trembling but determined hands. "What is this?" asked Richard with a nervous laugh. "Sarah, this isn't the time for games." But my daughter ignored him. She stood in the center of the room where everyone could see her. "Family, friends, what you are about to hear is the truth about the man you know as Richard. The man my mother and I know in a very different way." Richard took a step toward her. "Sarah, enough. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is ridiculous." His voice had lost its softness. Now it sounded hard, threatening, but it was too late. Chloe pressed the play button, and Richard's voice filled the room. Richard's voice came out of the speakers with perfect clarity. "Look, the old woman has a house worth about $500,000 in this market. It's completely paid off, and she gets $1,400 a month from Social Security. That's money that's being wasted." It was a phone conversation. Another man's voice could be heard on the other end. "And how do you plan to do it?" Richard laughed with a cold laugh that froze my blood. "It's easy. The old lady is already senile. She forgets things. She gets confused. I'm going to get a doctor to certify that she isn't in her right mind. Then Sarah gets legal power over her as the only child, and I handle everything through Sarah." The silence in the room was absolute. Everyone was frozen, staring at the speakers as if they were a bomb about to explode. Richard had lost all color in his face. "This is fake," he stammered. "It's an edited recording. This is illegal." But no one paid attention to him because the recording continued. "And what if the daughter doesn't cooperate?" asked the other voice. Richard let out a contemptuous laugh. "Sarah does what I tell her. I've had her eating out of my hand for years. She's weak, sentimental. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her if I tell her it's to help her mom." Sarah had tears rolling down her cheeks, but she stood firm. Chloe took her hand in support. The recording went on. "Once I have control of the properties, I sell the house. With that money, I pay my debts, and whatever's left, I invest. I put the old woman in a state nursing home, one of those cheap ones. I take pictures of her crying and complaining so Sarah feels guilty and doesn't protest. And that's it. Problem solved." The other voice laughed. "You're a genius, Richard. Wish I had a mother-in-law with assets to do the same." Richard's relatives started murmuring among themselves. I saw faces of shock, indignation, disbelief. Richard's mother put a hand to her mouth. His father was red with anger, but he didn't know who to direct it at. David, the birthday brother, looked at Richard as if he didn't recognize him. Chloe stopped the recording. "This was recorded 2 months ago," my granddaughter said with a trembling but strong voice. "We have over 20 hours of similar conversations. Conversations where my father plans in detail how to steal everything from my grandmother, how to manipulate documents, how to forge signatures if necessary, how to bribe public officials." Richard reacted finally. He lunged toward Chloe, trying to take the phone from her. "Give me that! You have no right to record me without my permission." But David stopped him, grabbing him by the arm. "Wait, Richard. Let her finish." Richard struggled. "Let me go. This is a conspiracy against me. My wife and daughter have gone crazy. They're trying to destroy me." Sarah took a step toward him. "Crazy? Crazy for discovering you plan to destroy my mother? Crazy for not allowing you to steal her estate?" Her voice was like a whip. "I've spent 3 months sleeping next to a monster. 3 months, knowing the truth, and having to pretend everything was fine." Richard's father spoke with a thunderous voice. "Is it true what they say, Richard? Were you planning to steal from your mother-in-law?" Richard shook his head desperately. No, Dad. It's all a misunderstanding. I only wanted to help her. Those conversations are taken out of context. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. Context? What context justifies saying you're going to put my mother in a substandard facility while you keep $500,000 from her house? She pulled a folder from her bag. But there's more, much more. She opened the folder and started pulling out documents. Here is a power of attorney already drafted, waiting for my mother's signature. A power that would give him total control over her assets. She passed the documents so they would circulate among the guests. Here is a loan application using my mother's house as collateral. A loan for $80,000 that Richard planned to apply for in her name without her knowledge. More papers circulated. The faces of the relatives became more and more horrified with every document. Here are emails between Richard and a crooked lawyer discussing how much it would cost to get a fake psychiatric evaluation, declaring my mother mentally incompetent. My daughter was relentless, exposing every piece of evidence with surgical precision. And here, said Sarah, pulling out more papers, are screenshots of conversations where Richard mocks my mother. He calls her a burden, a useless old woman, a smelly cleaner. Those words resonated in the room because everyone had heard Richard use exactly those terms yesterday during lunch. The witnesses of my humiliation now understood that it hadn't been an isolated, cruel comment. It was part of a systematic pattern of abuse and degradation. Richard didn't just plan to steal from my mother. He spent years destroying her self-esteem, making her feel small and invisible, preparing the ground so that no one would question when he finally committed her. At that moment, Mr. Peterson approached the center of the room. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Peterson, and I am an attorney specializing in family law and elder protection. He took out his identification and showed it. I have reviewed all the evidence that Mrs. Sarah and Miss Chloe have compiled over the last 3 months, and I can confirm that what they have presented here constitutes multiple felonies. His professional and calm voice gave an official weight to the whole situation. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a legal case. The crimes include attempted estate fraud, conspiracy to commit forgery, financial abuse of an elder, and potentially kidnapping, had he proceeded with the plan to institutionalize Mrs. Eleanor against her will. Mr. Peterson looked directly at Richard. Mr. Richard, each of these crimes carries prison time. Collectively, you are looking at a possible sentence of 5 to 15 years. Richard staggered as if he had been physically hit. You can't prove anything. Those recordings are illegal. They're not admissible in court. Mr. Peterson smiled coldly. Actually, in this state, recording conversations is legal if at least one of the parties consents. Your daughter Chloe was party to several of those conversations and consented to record them. As for the others, the nature of the criminal conspiracy discussion often voids expectation of privacy. Richard's mother started sobbing. How could you, Richard? How could you plan something so horrible? Richard turned to her desperately. Mom, it's not what it looks like. I just wanted to secure our future. Sarah and I have debts. We needed that money. His words were like a confession. He had just admitted he did need the money from my house. David let go of him with disgust. You are a disgrace to this family. Other relatives started expressing their rejection. I can't believe you're capable of something like this. That poor lady gave you everything, and this is how you repay her. You should be in jail. Richard looked around, seeking support, but only found faces of disappointment and repulsion. His perfect world was crumbling before his eyes. This isn't over, he threatened with a trembling voice. I'm going to get lawyers. I'm going to fight this. Mr. Peterson took a step forward. You can try, Mr. Richard, but I must inform you that we already presented all this evidence to the district attorney's office this morning. There is an official investigation underway, and considering the severity of the crimes and the flight risk, it is likely that an arrest warrant will be issued within the next 48 hours. The color drained completely from Richard's face. Sarah approached him. For a moment, I thought she was going to console him, but instead, she spoke to him with a voice hard as steel. I want a divorce, and you aren't getting a dime from me. This house where we live is legally mine because it was bought with the money my mother lent me and my monthly payments. You never contributed to the equity. only to current expenses. So you have no right to anything. Richard tried to touch her, but she pulled away. Don't ever touch me again. You disgust me. You used my love to try to destroy my mother. There is no forgiveness for that. I stood up, trembling from my chair. All eyes turned to me. For years I had been invisible at these gatherings. But now they finally saw me. Really saw me. I walked toward Richard and looked him straight in the eyes. He tried to hold my gaze but couldn't. He lowered his eyes in shame. Richard, I said with a voice I didn't know I had. You tried to take the only thing I had left in this world. My house, bought with 40 years of scrubbing other people's floors. My dignity, earned with sacrifices you could never understand. But you failed because you underestimated the women of this family. Richard kept his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to face my eyes. All his power, all his arrogance, had evaporated. He was a small, cowardly man, exposed before the world. For years you made me feel insignificant, I continued firmly. You humiliated me in front of others. You called me dirty, smelly, useless, all to mentally prepare me for the day you would take everything from me. But you didn't count on my daughter watching you. You didn't count on my granddaughter being brave enough to record you. You didn't count on the three of us, the women you despised, being smarter than you. Chloe came to my side and took my arm affectionately. Sarah stood on the other side. The three of us together, 3 generations of women who had been underestimated, now standing in front of the man who had tried to destroy us. Grandma, Chloe said clearly so everyone could hear. I want everyone here to know who you really are. You aren't a smelly cleaner, as this man called you. You are a woman who was widowed at 45, and instead of giving up, worked 3 jobs simultaneously to raise your daughter alone. You paid off a whole house with your own hands. You sent my mother to college, selling even your wedding jewelry, Sarah continued. My mother gave me everything she didn't have. She gave me an education, opportunities, a future. When I got married, she lent me her life savings. $20,000. I never paid back because this man spent it on nonsense. My mother never complained, never demanded. She just kept working, kept fighting, kept being the strongest woman I know. Tears flowed freely down my daughter's cheeks, and I was so blind I didn't see for years how this wretch treated her. I am ashamed to have taken so long to protect her. Richard's relatives were silent. Some of those who had laughed at me the day before now looked at the floor in shame. Richard's mother approached me with red, teary eyes. Mrs. Eleanor, I have no words to apologize for my son. What he planned to do is unforgivable. If there is anything I can do to compensate even a little for the damage. Her voice broke. I looked at her and saw a mother shattered by her son's actions. You are not to blame for what he chose to be, I told her gently. But thank you for your words. Mr. Peterson spoke again. Mr. Richard, I strongly recommend you hire a criminal defense attorney as soon as possible. The D.A. is going to proceed with charges based on the evidence presented. I also inform you that a temporary restraining order has been issued. You cannot approach Mrs. Eleanor or her property within 500 feet. Violating this order will result in immediate arrest. Richard finally looked up. There were tears in his eyes, but I didn't know if they were genuine regret or just self-pity. I didn't want it to go this far. I just needed money. I have debts. The bank is pressuring me. David, his brother, stepped forward. So the solution was to rob a 70-year-old woman? To destroy your wife's mother? Richard, I've known you since you were born, and I never thought you'd be capable of something so vile. Richard's father spoke with a voice laden with disappointment. You have brought shame to this family. Do not expect our support in this. You are going to face the consequences of your actions alone. Richard looked at his family, seeking even one friendly face, but found only rejection. His entire world had collapsed in less than an hour. Sarah took some papers out of her bag. These are the divorce papers. I filed them this morning. I also included an eviction notice. You have 72 hours to get your belongings out of my house. After that, anything you leave will be donated or thrown in the trash. Richard looked at her with desperation. Sarah, please. We can talk about this. We can go to counseling. I can change. My daughter let out a dry laugh. Counseling? For a man who spent years planning to rob my mother? There's no therapy that fixes that. There's no going back. Us, We ended the day you decided your ambition was more important than my family. Richard tried one last resort. He turned to me with a pleading expression. Mother-in-law, you are a good Christian woman. You can forgive. You can tell them to drop the charges. I'll pay you everything I owe you. I'll pay back the $20,000 with interest. Just give them a chance to talk to me, to understand my situation. He looked at me with those eyes he had used so many times to manipulate, to get what he wanted. But they didn't work anymore. I had seen his true face. I had heard his poisonous words in those recordings. I had seen the documents he planned to use to destroy me. Richard, I said calmly, for years I opened my heart to you. I considered you my family. When you married my daughter, I welcomed you with love despite my doubts. I lent you money I never asked for back. I gave you my trust, and you used all that against me. You planned to take my house, the house where I lived with my late husband, where I raised my daughter, where all my memories are. You planned to put me in a cheap nursing home, to forget me there while you spent my money. There is no forgiveness for that. Not because I can't forgive, but because you don't deserve to be forgiven. The silence that followed my words was absolute. Richard crumbled into a chair, head in his hands. Some of his relatives began to leave the party, uncomfortable with the situation. Others stayed murmuring amongst themselves, processing what they had just witnessed. The birthday party had turned into a public trial, and the accused had been found guilty unanimously. David approached me and shook my hand. Mrs. Eleanor, I deeply regret what my brother tried to do to you. If you need anything, any help, please don't hesitate to ask. Other relatives of Richard who had some decency approached to apologize, to express their solidarity with me. It was strange to receive this attention after years of being ignored at these gatherings. But I didn't do it for the attention. I did it for justice, for dignity, for all the older women who are seen as easy targets by unscrupulous relatives. Mr. Peterson handed me his card. Mrs. Eleanor, let's keep in touch during the legal process. I'm going to ensure justice is served. I also recommend you change the locks on your house immediately and check all your bank accounts to ensure there are no unauthorized movements. I nodded and put the card away. Sarah hugged me tight. We did it, Mom. We finally exposed him. I stroked her hair like when she was a little girl. You did it, honey. You had the courage to investigate, to gather evidence, to face your own husband. That requires a strength not many people have. Chloe joined the hug. Us women are warriors, Grandma. No one messes with us and gets away with it. Her youthful voice was full of pride and determination. At that moment, I knew my granddaughter would be fine in life, that she would never allow anyone to trample on her. We walked out of that house with our heads held high. Richard stayed there, surrounded by the rubble of his destroyed reputation, facing the disappointed stares of his own family. I didn't feel pity for him. He had multiple opportunities to be a good person, to treat his family with respect, to live honestly. He had chosen the path of greed and cruelty. Now he would pay the price. In the car, on the way back, none of us spoke much. We were emotionally exhausted. But there was peace in the silence, the peace that comes after a battle won, the peace of knowing we had fought for what was right and triumphed. Sarah dropped me off at my house and walked me to the door. Mom, tomorrow I'm going to come with a locksmith to change all your locks, and we're going to review all your documents together to make sure they're safe. I felt her gratitude. And how are you, daughter? I know this can't be easy. Despite everything, you were married to that man for 10 years. Sarah took a deep breath. I'm devastated, Mom, but also relieved. Now I know the truth. Now I can start to heal. And most importantly, I protected you. That's the only thing that matters. The following months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Richard was arrested a week after the exposure at the party. The charges were formally filed: attempted estate fraud, conspiracy to forge documents, and planned financial abuse against an elderly person. Mr. Peterson was relentless in his work. He presented every recording, every document, every piece of evidence before the judge. Richard hired an expensive lawyer who tried to argue that it had all been a misunderstanding, that the conversations were taken out of context, that he never had the real intention of executing those plans. But it was too late. The evidence was overwhelming and clear. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I had to testify. It was one of the hardest experiences of my life. I had to sit on that stand and recount in front of a room full of strangers how I had felt humiliated, belittled, harassed for years. I had to describe every insult, every cruel comment, every attempt by Richard to get me to sign documents I didn't understand. Richard's lawyer tried to paint me as a confused old woman who had misinterpreted her son-in-law's good intentions. But Sarah and Chloe also testified. Their testimonies were devastating for the defense. Chloe, barely 22, stood in front of the court and spoke with a clarity that filled me with pride. My father said my grandmother was an obstacle that had to be removed. He said it was wasted money keeping her alive in her own house when that property could be generating income for him. I heard him say those exact words. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a cold, calculated plan to exploit a vulnerable woman. The jury listened to every word with expressions of growing disgust. Sarah cried during her testimony as she described how she had discovered the documents, how she had felt betrayed not only as a wife, but as a daughter. The verdict came on a gray Friday in October, guilty on all counts. Richard was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 if he demonstrated good behavior. He was also ordered to pay a fine of $50,000 and cover all legal costs of the process. His license to work in financial institutions was permanently revoked. His reputation was destroyed. The local newspapers covered the case with headlines reading, "Bank executive convicted of planning to rob elderly mother-in-law." His name became synonymous with family betrayal and greed. Sarah's divorce was finalized 2 months after the verdict. She didn't ask for anything from him because he had nothing to offer. The house where they had lived was legally hers, bought with my $20,000 down payment and her monthly payments for 10 years. Richard left that marriage without a dime, without a property, with nothing but a prison sentence waiting for him. Sarah sold that house because she couldn't stand the memories. With the money, she bought a smaller but cozy house near mine. We could finally be neighbors, be close to each other as it should have always been. Chloe finished her college degree in business administration with honors. She got an excellent job at an accounting firm where she earned nearly $3,000 a month. She moved in with Sarah to help with expenses, while her mom recovered emotionally from the divorce. The two of them came to visit me almost every day. We drank coffee in my small kitchen and talked about everything and nothing. Sarah was in therapy, processing years of emotional manipulation she hadn't recognized while inside the relationship. Slowly, my daughter was returning to being the strong and confident woman I had raised. I also made changes in my life. At 70 years old, I decided to finally retire completely. I left the cleaning jobs I was still doing. My body thanked me. My knees stopped hurting so much. My hands began to heal from the cracks caused by decades of cleaning chemicals. With my pension of $1,200 a month, and without the pressure of helping Sarah financially, I could live modestly, but with dignity. I changed all the locks on my house as Mr. Peterson had recommended. I put my important documents in a safe that only I could open. I made sure everything was in order legally. I also did something I never thought I would do. I wrote a clear and detailed will with Mr. Peterson's help. In it, I specified that my house and any savings I had at the time of my death would go completely to Sarah. But I also included protection clauses. If Sarah remarried, the property would remain solely in her name, separate from any marital assets. No one else could touch what I had built with my sweat. I also left something special for Chloe. The jewelry remaining from my marriage to James and $5,000 I managed to save in these last few months by not having medical or work expenses. A year after the trial, I received a letter from Richard from prison. Sarah handed it to me with a worried expression. "You don't have to read it if you don't want to, Mom," but I decided to do it. The letter was long, full of apologies that sounded hollow and justifications that justified nothing. Richard explained that he had grown up in a family where financial success was everything, that he had felt pressure to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford, that he had made bad decisions out of desperation. He ended by asking for forgiveness and begging me to intercede to reduce his sentence. I read the letter twice and then put it in a drawer. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say to him. Forgiveness is personal and complex. Maybe someday, when I am very old and close to the end of my life, I will find space in my heart to forgive him. But it wouldn't be for him. It would be for me, to free myself from any remaining bitterness. But that day hadn't arrived yet, and maybe it never would, and I was at peace with that. Not everything has to be forgiven to move on. Sometimes justice is enough. Sometimes protecting what is yours is enough. 2 years after the trial, on a sunny spring afternoon, I was sitting in my garden when Sarah and Chloe arrived with a surprise. "Mom, Grandma, we want to show you something." Sarah took out her phone and showed me a video. It was a short documentary that Chloe had produced as a university project. It was called The Silent Warriors and told our story. It told of older women who are seen as easy targets by greedy relatives. It told of the importance of protecting our elders, of valuing their dignity, of recognizing they have rights no one can take away. The documentary used our story as an example, but protected our identities with fake names and blurred faces. It had been accepted into several student film festivals. Chloe had made it to raise awareness, so other families would be alert to the signs of financial abuse against the elderly. "I want your story to help others, Grandma. I want women like you to know they aren't alone, that they can fight, that they can win." Tears rolled down my cheeks as I watched the video. My pain, my struggle, my victory would now serve to protect others. Nothing could make me feel prouder. Today, I am 72 years old. My hair is completely white. My hands are marked by decades of hard work. My back is a little hunched, but I walk with my head held high. I live in my house, the house I paid for with my own effort and that no one could take from me. Sarah comes to have lunch with me every Sunday. Chloe visits me during the week and tells me about her work, her dreams, her plans. I have a simple life, but full of true love. I learned that family isn't just blood. It's who stands by your side when everything falls apart. It's who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. If there is anything I want other women to learn from my story, it is this: never allow anyone to make you feel insignificant. Your value isn't determined by your age, your bank account, or your education level. Your value is in your dignity, in your history, in the battles you have survived. Protect your documents, know your rights, mistrust anyone who shows too much interest in your property. And if you have good children or grandchildren who truly love you, hold on to them. They are your true wealth. I lost years feeling small and scared, but in the end, with the help of my daughter and granddaughter, I recovered my voice. I recovered my power, and no one will ever take it from me again.